Hello and welcome to this episode of BariAftercare, the podcast. Let me share with you my technical difficulties in recording this particular episode. Yesterday, I spent 1 hour and 12 minutes recording this podcast, only to find out that there was, alas, no sound. So I thought, well, maybe the universe is trying to protect you all, because as I was recording it, I realized the order was not that great. So I spent some time today reordering things and reorganizing things. So I think you're going to get a better podcast. Except tonight, when I went to plug in my really nice Logitech camera, not having it. Nothing's going on. So if you're watching this on YouTube, I apologize for that awful picture. Although there's part of me that's a little grateful for the graininess, because not too long ago, I got back from a walk with my dog, so I got a little bit of a sweat head going on. Oh, it's been a difficult podcast episode beginning for me for this particular episode, but I hope that you really like it. I like it now that I've reorganized it, and let me tell you that the topic for this evening is that thief of joy, technology. No, I'm just kidding. But that is a thief of my joy, I promise you. But the podcast episode is actually called That Thief of Joy, Comparison. Let's go ahead and get started, but I want to remind you that in just a few weeks, the podcast will no longer be called BariAftercare, but it will be called Weight Loss Winformation. So when you hear weight loss winformation, don't worry, you're still listening to the same great information. All right, let's get on with this. That thief of joy, comparison. We all know what comparison is, so we're going to cover that. But what I want you to do is pay attention to what ways that you in particular compare yourself to others. Then we're going to talk about the reasons that people compare, and I'll give you a little background on the comparison theory, which is actually a theory in the field of psychology, and go over how people compare specifically, and if there are some benefits to comparing, and we know there are downfalls to comparing. Otherwise, why would we call it the thief of joy? But we'll get into all of that, and we'll talk about what we can do to cut back on comparing ourselves, especially in negative ways. So listen as I go through this little list of reasons that people compare, and see if you can identify for yourself in what areas you find yourself comparing to other people the most. So it's a human thing, first of all. I want you to understand that comparison is a very normal thing. It's just something humans innately do. Now, we can choose how much of that we engage in, and we can learn to train our brains a little bit to not let ourselves go to those negative places if that's where you go. But here are the reasons that researchers say that we compare in different areas of life. So we tend to compare ourselves, shock of all shockers, my friends, in terms of our appearance and our body image. Now, I know that comes as a real surprise to everybody, and I'll bet not a one of you compare your appearance or body image to others. I know I have done this for pretty much my entire life. And I think I've shared this before with you, but I think that the first time I can remember being conscious of comparing my physical body or my appearance to other girls my age was when I was about 14 years old. And we were sitting down chatting and wearing our short shorts. And when you're sitting crisscross applesauce, as we call it these days, and where your hip and your thigh meet, there's a little bit of skin there. And I thought, oh my gosh, look at that. I'm fat. There's skin and it's bulging. And I thought, my gosh. And I was 14 years old. And I am now in my 60s. And the appearance and body image competition has raged in my head for almost all of my adult life. Now, I had an epiphany recently, and that was, when does it end? When does it end? I'm thinking, I'm in my 60s. Seriously, when does this end? And the answer came to me clear as day, friends, and this will go for you too. It ends when I say it ends. Meaning, as soon as I make the choice to quit comparing my physical features to other people's, there is no comparison. I know, easier said than done, just like the topic of the last episode of BariAftercare, the podcast. But appearance and body image, clearly, we compare ourselves in attractiveness, weight, body size, body image, all of those things. Another area that people tend to compare themselves in is wealth and status. So financial success, things we own, the whole keeping up with the Joneses or the neighbors or the people down the block. Social standing, where do we think we fall in line in terms of social standing? These are common areas of comparison, especially with social media. But we're going to do a whole section in this podcast episode about social media. We also compare ourselves in terms of intelligence and abilities. Remember back to when you were in elementary school and we did the spelling bees and people had to read out loud and we would compare ourselves and how well we did with, spelling, or how about on the playground, and the team captains would pick the teams, and you, if you were like me, were always one of the last people picked for any kind of athletic team. So we compare our abilities and our intelligence, and our sense of self can be altered in a good way or not so good way in all this comparison sort of thing. So this comparison starts early in life, and it can lead to feeling good about yourself or areas of inadequacy and powerful stuff. Other areas that people innately compare themselves are in success and achievements. What kind of career a person has, or what's your job title? What kind of promotions do the people around you at work seem to get? What are people's overall accomplishments? Like, do you have a wall full of plaques and trophies and medals? And now in the baseball teams, they use these rings instead of the trophies. These benchmarks of comparison, everybody's striving to keep up with or surpass the perceived success of other people. Now, I've also shared this with you at different times. When I was a young woman in my 20s, I had a job. I was in sales, and sales is often a breeding ground for people with low self-esteem. And the reason it often attracts people like me at that time with very low self-esteem was that if I could see my name in lights, not literally in lights, but at the top of the sales chart, comparing who sold how much this week and who's doing the best, I felt like it gave me some sense of value, something that I was not horrible at, something that made me feel like I had some kind of worth. That's a pretty sad statement, but it was the truth for me at that time. And when I started into therapy, one of the things I learned initially was a life rich in accomplishment is often poor in joy. And that was very true for me at that time in my life, because my accomplishments were the only thing that I felt gave me any sense of worth, but I wasn't filled with joy. Now my life is much different. It's backwards, in fact. I'm not out seeking awards and accomplishments and checking my likes or reading my comments. I don't do any of that, but I have a lot of joy. So interesting, this comparison thing and how it affects us. Another area of comparison is relationships and social life. And again, when we get to this section on social media and comparison, holy moly, people put up their highlight reels and how great everything looks. And there's nothing wrong with posting the wonderful things that are going on in your life. What happens is within each of us, how we perceive that and what we tell ourselves about that. But we compare, if we're single and everybody seems to be paired up, or if we're widowed and everybody else seems to have a spouse or a partner, or if people are very social and we're not, and we compare ourselves negatively, all that stuff. So again, Areas of comparison: appearance and body image. Is that you? Wealth and status. Is that you? Intelligence and abilities. Success and achievements, and relationships and social status. So just kind of keep a mental tab of the areas in which you spend more time comparing yourself to others. And we'll talk about if it's helping you or hindering you as we go through the episode here. So what are the reasons we compare? Well, social comparison helps us to understand ourselves. And it kind of helps us understand our place in the world by giving us a reference point, maybe to look at, am I good at this or am I not? You know, you've seen American Idol and people get on there and they think their ability to sing is great. And yet, compared to some of the others on there, they pretty much suck. Now, those are probably a joke and a ploy and all of that, but that's kind of what we do. It's like you sing in the shower and maybe you think you're really good, and then you listen to Kelly Clarkson or somebody you think is an amazing singer, and you're like, maybe not so much. Or we compare our, we want to know what our status is. And again, I go back to like middle school and high school, and you had the popular crowd, and you had the different groups, and where did you fit in, and how did that affect how you felt about yourself? And then achievements. It's like, sometimes I think, I don't, you look around you and I think, oh my gosh, people can draw and people can sing and people can act and people can play instruments. And I think, I have no talent. But it's that thought associated with it, because I know a lot of people who can get up and speak in front of the public, and I could get up in front of 10,000 people and it wouldn't bother me in the least. So it's how we perceive and what we're specifically looking at that we're going to have to look at here in a little bit. But social comparison kind of helps us to understand it. Also, and I'll get to this in a minute, can help you understand your social surroundings. So one of the reasons that we compare is to provide us with motivation and maybe get some sense of improvement. So if you're in the weight loss community, for sure, if you look at people who have lost weight and kept their weight off for 10 or 15 years, those people can be huge sources of motivation, inspiration, and lead you to want to know what they're doing and to follow in their footsteps. So comparison in that regard can be an amazing thing. So that's one of the reasons that people compare themselves and have this self-evaluation. Another reason is like social understanding. And the biggest example that I can think of in this one is, what they say about this is comparing yourself to others can help us learn about what's normal in your society, or what are the expectations in this particular group of people, or what's considered to be valuable within a culture or a group. So I've lived in different parts of the country, and it's by looking at other people and watching other people and evaluating my norms from where I came from compared to what they do in different parts of the country. So for example, I come from the Midwest, and in the Midwest, we're very laid back. We're pretty direct, maybe not as direct as what the social norms are in like New York City or the Northeast. But the people in the Midwest are pretty direct and pretty straightforward. If we want to know something, we'll ask. If we have a thought about something, we'll pretty much share it. And there's not a lot of pretense in the Midwest. We are who we are, and what you see is what you get. So when we moved, and I was in my early 30s when my husband and myself and our 3 little kids moved to Texas. Well, in Texas, there were some things that I had to observe and compare myself and see, this doesn't really fit in here. The people in Texas were much more mannerly in terms of communication. There was a lot of yes, ma'am, and yes, sir. There were a lot different gender role manners. For example, and again, this was 30 years ago, but I was a young woman. I was in my early 30s, and I would get on the Aggie bus because I went to Texas A&M, and those young men would stand up and say, ma'am, and offer me their seat. Well, for gosh sake, at first I was very offended because I was like, my gosh, I'm only 30. I'm not like 80 years old. But that was the norm. That was the social norm. That was the expectation. That was what was considered valuable in that group and that culture. So then we move from Iowa to Texas to Georgia, where again, things are a little bit different. In Iowa, my children called my friends by their first name. Hi, Diane. Hi, Di. Hi, Katie. Hi, so-and-so. They called the adults by their first name. Not so in the Deep South. It is definitely Miss Diane or Miss Laura or Miss Katie. And it's first names a lot of the time, but it's Miss so-and-so. In fact, so much so that when I worked at this first place I worked, they called me Miss the Kids. It was adolescence where I worked. Miss Dr. Stapleton, which I thought was the cutest thing I had ever heard. Miss Dr. Stapleton. Because the use of Miss is so normative. That's the expectation. That is what is considered normal in the culture here. And it's yes, sir, and no, sir. In the schools, it's yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, yes, sir, no, sir, to the teachers. And that's very different than the Midwest. So we gain some social understanding about what's appropriate in the culture where we live. Another reason we compare is we don't want to be left behind. As humans, we all have the basic need to feel like we fit in. So we have this FOMO thing, we fear of missing out. So when we compare ourselves to others, especially as younger people, we figure out how we can fit in. If everybody's wearing cowboy boots, then you wear cowboy boots. If everybody's wearing Air Jordans, you want to wear Air Jordans because you want to fit in so you don't feel ostracized or left behind. So those are some of the reasons why people compare. Now, this whole social comparison thing is a psychological theory that came about in the 1950s by a psychologist named Leo Festinger. And it's the idea that people are going to determine their own social worth through social status and their personal worth. And this is where it can get problematic. If we're going to determine our social or personal worth based on how we stack up against others. Oof, right? Okay. Now, if you're a kid who struggled with something that wasn't considered to be part of the normative group in elementary school or middle school, say, for example, when I was a kid, red hair was to be made fun of. So if you had red hair, you did not fit in. Think how that's going to affect a child's sense of self and their social status. Now let's go to all the children who suffered with the disease of obesity as children and how they are often ostracized and how that affects their sense of social value or their sense of personal worth. If they're being made fun of, maybe it's at school, maybe it's at home, maybe it's by family, maybe it's by strangers, maybe it's by all of the above. Think about how that social input from others affects how you feel about yourself. That is powerful, powerful stuff. So this is important. And then what we do with that later on is also important. We're going to get to that. But there are some studies that say about 10% of our thoughts involve comparisons of some kind. So as you're going through the day, you start to pay attention to, if you're on social media or if you're at a support group meeting and people are losing weight at different rates than you are, maintaining their weight or seeming to keep losing weight, or some people are gaining weight. How are you comparing yourself to others? Or if you're out in a social group, how are you comparing what you're wearing to what other people are wearing, or how they appear to feel about themselves compared to how you appear to feel about yourself or how you feel about yourself? One of the things that I learned really, really early on, and I'm going to repeat this a couple of times in this episode because it's very, very important and critical to our well-being is to remember that people tend to compare how they feel on the outside to how other people look. No. Got that wrong. Scratch that. People tend to compare how we feel on the inside to how other people look on the outside. I'll repeat it. We tend to compare how we feel on the inside to what other people look like on the outside. So I may be feeling really insecure in a group of strangers where there's a bunch of small talk, which is truly something I absolutely hate. I am uncomfortable, I am nervous, I am anxious in a group where there's a lot of small talk. Other people, I look around and I think, wow, everybody looks so comfortable talking to people. Everybody looks like they're at ease in this social situation, and I'm feeling very distressed. And so I may judge myself through this comparison as lacking in the skill of small talk. Now, other people may be feeling exactly as I am on the inside. They also may be scared and like feeling uncomfortable. And they may look at me and think, wow, she looks really comfortable. She looks like she's having a great time. It looks like it's so easy for her to talk to people. Now, I can do it. It's not my favorite thing to do. But that's a great example of how we compare how we feel on the inside to what other people look like on the outside. Another example might be I feel frumpy in some outfit that I'm wearing, and I will be honest about this as well. I can't put an outfit together to save my soul. I have to buy it off the rack or have somebody help me put something together, because if I were left to my own devices, I would wear a pair of joggers and a hoodie all the time. So when I used to work in an office instead of at home, I would go into the store and say, can you help me put an outfit together? I had to have people help me put my outfits together all the time because I don't have that skill. But I'll look around me and I'll be like, oh my gosh, look at their sense of style, or wow, look at. And people, if they feel that way about themselves, might have looked at me in my working days and thought the same thing. They might have thought, wow, she really knows how to dress. I didn't put that outfit together. So we compare how we feel on the inside to what other people are presenting on the outside. And we don't know what's going on the inside of them either. But that is something to be aware of and to keep in mind, that you don't know what's going on inside of other people. And they may have better acting skills than you do. Who knows? So we do a lot of this comparing ourselves throughout the day. And sometimes this comparison may be a great source of motivation. Like, you know what? I really like how that person, maybe I have an interest in painting and I go to a craft fair, which I don't have an interest in painting, but let's say I did. And I see a booth and there's an artist there and they have a very unique style. And I think, wow, I'd like to talk to them and learn some of their techniques. So it could motivate me to want to learn something new and maybe up my own game. Now, that same experience could also result in my feeling deep satisfaction or jealousy or inadequacy, because I might think, oh my God, look at their stuff. It's so good. And you know what? In comparison, mine kind of sucks. And some bad things can come out of that kind of social comparison, which we're going to talk about in just a minute. So, is it better to compare yourself to those you think are doing better than you, or those who are doing worse than you in your own perception? That brings me to the two primary forms of social comparison. There's upward comparison and there's downward comparison. And we'll talk about each kind. And as I go through this, think about if you do the upward comparison and how it affects you, and or if you do the downward comparison and how that affects you. We probably all do some of both. How it affects each person might be different based on spoiler alert, how you think about things, which is a topic we talk about a lot in the BariAftercare podcast. So let's talk about both of these kinds of comparison, the upward comparison and downward, because both of them can be harmful, both of them can be helpful. And the if we take it helpfully, like to improve ourselves or motivate ourselves, or if we take it and we bash ourselves over the head and feel worse about ourselves, depends on how we process that information. What am I doing with what I'm seeing? How am I thinking about it as it relates to me? We're going to talk a lot more about that, but let's first describe what upward comparison is and how that can be helpful. And I would encourage you to utilize upward comparison in this way and avoid how I'll describe how it can be harmful. So upward social comparison is when we evaluate ourselves or compare ourselves to people we think are doing a better job at something than we are, or maybe more successful, or are, and I use quotes here, better than us in some way. Now I want to pause here and make a point that I want you to drive home to yourself and to every human being you ever run across in your life. There is no human being on the planet that is better than or worser than or has more value than any other human being. Every human being born onto the planet has equal value. I don't care if you're the most athletic person or if you're born with no legs. I don't care if you can sing like Barbra Streisand or Celine Dion, or you can sing like me, which is not at all. All of us have equal worth. I don't care if you look like Gigi Hadid, which I just saw a picture of her today. I didn't know what she looked like. Or if you look like the person you think is the least attractive person on the planet. Every human being has equal value, regardless of their talents, their height, their hair color, their lack of hair, their weight, their social economic status, the color of their skin, the color of their eyes, how big their nose is. It doesn't matter. Every single human being has equal value. So let's go with that. So when I put in air quotes, when you compare yourself to somebody you think is better than you, I mean maybe they're more athletically inclined than you, or maybe they are more artistically inclined. So, okay, some people are better singers, but they don't have better value than anybody else. So you get what I'm saying. So remember that you have as much value as every other human being on the planet. And that is an important thing to remember, especially when we're talking about comparison. All right, so upward comparison. So I'm looking at, if I'm doing upward comparison, I'm going to look at Mel Robbins. Or I'm going to look at, she's not a psychologist, but I'm going to look at Brene Brown. And I'm going to look at, people who I really value and respect and think, wow, look what they're doing. I'd really like to be doing some of that. And Mel Robbins said in her book, what's that book called? Let Them. She's like, there's a blueprint. If you want to be a public speaker, there is a blueprint for how to do that. And she spells it out for you. So if I want to do more like Mel is, or, do more social media kinds of things or public presentations, then I have to do that work. So I can look at her, and if that's a goal of mine, which it is not, by the way, I mean, it is, but it isn't. Like, I don't have any desire to do the kinds of public performances or any of that. Now, do I have a desire to up my game with podcasting? Absolutely. Do I have a desire to up the number of listeners like Mel? Absolutely. Now, I can look at that in two ways. So I'm upward comparing myself to Brene Brown or Mel Robbins. And I can say, you know what? That is motivation. That motivates me to want to improve my performance, to want to improve my skills, to want to improve my learning about how it is they do what they do. So it can be a great motivator if I look at somebody who's a little better, or if you're on a sports team and you look at somebody who's a better hitter or a better catcher or a better volleyball server or whatever it is, and you're like, you know what? I got to talk to them about, how they got to that level. So upward comparison can be very, very helpful if it's an inspiration, if it's a motivation to improve my own process or to develop a better skill set. In that way, it can be very, very, very positive. And I'm going to give you some examples that you might be able to relate to. And then we'll talk about how this could maybe not be such a good thing. So let's talk about upward social comparison being helpful in the realm of maintaining weight loss. So maybe you look at people who are doing really well and they're 5 years out from however they lost weight, or 10 years out, and you're like, that is so encouraging to me, because that is my goal at 5 years out, to be still maintaining this weight loss or pretty close to it. I'm going to talk to them. I'm going to pick their brain. I'm going to see what they're doing. And they're going to tell you they're doing the gotta do-ums, by the way, or at least some of them. Because no matter how a person loses weight, you have to do the gotta do-ums to maintain the weight loss. I didn't make that up. These gotta do-ums are all research-based. Doesn't mean you have to do all of them all the time. But people who maintain their weight loss, they're motivating to you, I hope. And I hope what that does is make you go, you know what? I want to do what they're doing. I'm going to talk to them. I'm going to talk to them about how they're making this work for them. That is motivating. Or maybe somebody at your job gets a promotion and you think, you know what? I'd like to go for a similar position within this organization. So I'm going to talk to them. I want to know, what did you do? Did you have to get some additional certifications? Did you have to take any specific classes? Or, did you volunteer in some way in the organization? And then follow suit so that I too can improve myself and therefore maybe land a similar promotion. Or maybe you have a hobby, like the example that I gave about painting. Or maybe you like gardening. Or maybe you want to make jewelry. And you go to these craft fairs and you're like, wow. You look at their work and you're like, they're doing more advanced stuff than I am. Or I really like that technique and I'd like to incorporate it into what I do. So that can be very motivating for you to learn more, or to ask if there's a class you could take to learn what they're doing. So upward social comparison can be very motivating, and I encourage you to use it as such. I remember hearing one time, this was before podcasts were a thing, but back in the day when I was in that sales occupation, I would listen to sales training tapes. Yes, the little cassette tapes in the car. Some of you are too young to even know what a cassette tape is, but hey, that's what we did back in the day. And I would listen, and I remember one of the motivational speakers saying, if you want to be like this kind of person, then you do the things that they do. So if I want to be like a person who maintains their weight, or if I want to be like that person who gets a lot of respect at work, or if I want to be like a person, if I want to be like a person who has a job like I'd like to have, or if I want to dress the way somebody does, then I have to learn to do the things that they do. I don't have to think about it or wish it would happen. I have to do. Remember, we talk a lot about the difference between I can wishing and a hoping, but unless I'm a doing, I ain't going to get the results. So if you want to be like the person you're upward comparing yourself to, then figure out what they're doing and then do that. That's a positive use of upward social comparison. There was an interesting study I read about, and this you guys could incorporate in your own lives. It was about how social networks can really improve the outcomes within their group. So this study had this, it was a friendly competition, but it was highly, highly effective. Not a little bit. It was highly effective in pushing people to exercise more. And what they did is these peers in this group pushed each other to keep up with one another and do more. And they refer to this as a social ratchet effect, like you ratchet things up a little bit, so that everybody's activity generated more activity among the others. So if you're in a walking group, or if you're in a couch to 5K group and you're out there and you're doing it together, and it's like, come on, I'll walk here with you, and maybe we can push, pick up our pace just a little bit. But this friendly competition and this cooperation was highly effective in pushing people to exercise more. Some of you participate in walking 5Ks or running or half marathons or marathons. And my daughters and I did a 60-mile breast cancer walk several years ago. And along the routes in these kinds of races and stuff, there are people cheering you on and holding up signs and really rallying you. And other runners, giving you the high five. And then all the people who finished at the finish line are there to congratulate you as you come in. And it's camaraderie. And it's really useful. So use that with your groups of people who are working to maintain weight loss or working to, whatever it is you're doing as a group, to work together and really encourage each other, because highly effective way to do that. Now, conversely, in the same study, they said people who simply offered each other positive encouragement, it was far less helpful. So if you send somebody an email and go, you got this, or, I know you're going to do great, you'll do, you got it, that's far less encouraging. I thought that was really interesting. So if you want to encourage other people and yourself, get together as a group and step it up together. All right. So how could an upward social comparison be harmful? Theodore Roosevelt is the dude who said comparison is the thief of joy, and he may have been right. So why can a comparison make people feel bad? Well, if you compare yourself to somebody who you think has it all, and you start thinking, oh my God, why do I even try? Or there's no way. It could never happen to somebody like me. That's going to make you feel bad, right? So it can be motivating, but remember, upward social comparison is somebody you perceive as doing something better than you or being more successful. Now, this can lead to increased feelings of inadequacy. It can lead to envy. It depends on the circumstances. But let's use those same examples that we talked about a few minutes ago, like maintaining weight loss. So you can look at somebody at a support group and go, wow, they've kept their weight off for 5 years, and look at me, I'm a year and a half out and I'm already regaining. Oh my God. And then the negative self-talk takes over and you go down that stinking thinking hole, and all of a sudden you're feeling inadequate. You're envious. You're resentful. You're jealous. Not good, right? Or somebody at work gets a promotion, and instead of, going, wow, maybe I could take a class and get that certification or whatever, you start going, why did they get picked and not me? I'm just as good as they are. So you become envious. You get resentful. You start, bemoaning. Oh, that could never happen for somebody like me. And then you go about mind reading about why they're probably sleeping with the boss. We do those kinds of things, and it's ugly. It's ugly self-talk, and it's ugly other talk. So sometimes looking at other people is not a good thing for us. So here's what research tells us. Now, if a person has a fairly high self-esteem or high perceived control, meaning I can do this, this is within my control. If I want to be a better runner, I will spend more time running. If I want to be a more masterful jewelry maker, I will spend more time learning techniques. If I want to maintain my weight loss, I will put more effort into portion control, meal prepping, all the things. So if you feel pretty good about yourself already and think, you know what, I can do that. You know what? I can put forth effort. I can do these things. If you have a fairly high self-esteem, then comparing yourself to somebody you perceive as being more fortunate or talented or whatever is good. It's not going to bother you. You're like, you know what? If they can do it, I can do it. On the other hand, if you have kind of a negative attitude or a low perceived sense of control, which means, I don't believe I can do these things, it's too hard, or if you have low self-esteem, now think about this. We've talked about this in other episodes. If you have struggled with weight and been socially ostracized or picked on for your whole life, in that area, you're not going to have the best self-esteem. So it's really hard, maybe, to not fall into insecurity if you compare yourself to somebody who you perceive is doing better. It's hard not to be jealous. It's hard not to fall into negativity or depression. So there are other areas in your life, maybe you have pretty good self-esteem, like you're really good at your job. And so you may look at upward comparison in that area as a reason for motivation. So be cautious, be careful. In those areas where you're not feeling so good about yourself, you might want to avoid comparing yourself to people who look like they have it all, because it can leave you feeling chronically inferior. We're going to talk more about how to stay away from that. We're going to talk for just a minute about, so that was upward, where you're looking at people you perceive to be better at something than you. Now we'll talk about downward social comparison. And that's where we compare ourselves to those we perceive as less fortunate or somehow worse off than we are. So maybe you're a good singer and you're like, oh, dude, keep your day job. Don't try to be a professional singer. But downward comparison, it's like, oh, now this can be helpful because it can be a self-esteem booster. It can enhance your well-being or feel more grateful, right? It can be helpful in that way. Now, there's some dangers that go along with that too, but for just a minute, let's talk about how it can be really helpful. So let's say you're feeling like you're kind of having a crummy day, and like I was having all this technology issue going on here, and I'm feeling frustrated, and I feel like I'm wasting time, and I got to get this stuff done, and I already lost my hour yesterday because there was no sound on my blah, 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 blah. So I could get really down and just, chuck it. And then that would not help me. Or I could go, you know what? There are people who would love to have this technology in their house. There would be people who would love to, have a podcast of their own. There are people who would love to have time to do a podcast. There are people who would love to, feel comfortable talking to an empty room on a microphone. And that can make you feel grateful. Or maybe you're feeling kind of bummed out about, you're pinching your pennies because you'd like to go on a vacation. And then you see something on TV about some really poverty-stricken areas, and it might make you feel grateful. You're like, I'm bitching and moaning because I don't get to go to the beach for a week. But my God, those people don't even have any clean water. So sometimes downward social comparison can be really helpful because it can put your perspective in a little better place. So you're feeling sorry for yourself, and then you go, oh my God, that person was just diagnosed with some horrible disease. And you're like, okay, quit your bitching. You put your welcome to camp, quit your bitching shirt on. And so sometimes it's like good perspective if you look at people who have it worse off. Now, this can be harmful because maybe you're using this downward social comparison because it could be a little bit of a self-esteem booster, right? It's like, oh, well, my singing's not that bad. It sees your circumstances in a little bit more of a positive light, but it can become a really unhealthy habit. Like, I'm looking at others and judging them more negatively so I can make myself feel better. That is not a good way to use social comparison. So if I need to put others down to make myself feel better, that is not a good thing to do. It's kind of like my days in the sales world. If I could see myself at the top of that list and other people were constantly at the bottom of that list, I could say, well, look at me. Look at how good I am at this. And it was just a cover-up. It was a cover-up. So this downward social comparison can lead to overconfidence, like, ooh, I am so good at this. It can lead to arrogance. It can lead to cockiness. It's gross, right? Who likes people who are arrogant and cocky? And the truth is, people who are arrogant and cocky are usually covering up for some sort of insecurity. So downward social comparison has risks as well as upward social comparison. Now, who does it affect and how? So if you have a high self-esteem, right? You think, you know what? I'm okay. I got this. I can do what I want to do if I put enough effort into it. So if you're that kind of person and you're downward comparing, you're comparing yourself to those who are less fortunate, it can tend to bolster your self-esteem and improve your mood. And that is in the sense of, kind of change your perspective. So I think in that sense, if you're feeling okay about yourself and you're just having a bad moment, you go, yeah, you know what? But I am so grateful because I have this and this and this and this. So that can be a good thing. So if you have a positive self-esteem and you're not cocky and you're like, I just needed to put some perspective on this situation and quit feeling sorry for myself. Now, if you have a low self-esteem or you don't feel like you have a lot of internal wherewithal to change your circumstances, or you feel inadequate, or sometimes then if you do this downward comparison and you look at people who you think are worse off than you are, it can result in feeling grandiose, and that's not what we want either. So if you don't feel good about yourself and you're looking at people to make yourself feel better, that's not a healthy use of that too. And what research says is, let's say, and this was me in the sales days, right? When you rely on other people for your sense of self, in other words, if other people aren't telling me how great and wonderful I am, if that sales report doesn't say, Connie, you have worth because you're at the top of this list, if that's how I get my sense of self and I don't have any within myself, it's a problem. We're at a risk for depression. And when I teach my class, Gain While You Lose, I talk about our self-worth. And if we've had, it's like a cup, right? So let's say we're born in the world with a full cup, but life happens and people tell you you're no good because you're no good at sports, or you're no good because you're overweight, or you're no good because you can't sing like your sister, or you're no good because you don't get grades like your cousin. We get holes poked in our cup, right? There's a hole in the bucket, dear Liza, and that self-worth pours out the bottom. And we can have 7,000 people pouring compliments, but unless we learn to plug our own hole, nothing's going to stick. So we have to be careful, because how we compare ourselves to others, if we're not feeling so good about ourselves, can really cause a lot of damage to ourselves. And we don't want to cause more damage where we're already, it's like pouring salt in a wound. And then you look at social media, right? I mean, come on. If we have any areas of insecurity and we look at these people who are posting their highlight reels, or how dressed up to the nines all the time when they're on there, or who look like they're partying all the time and have more friends than anybody could ever possibly imagine having. If we're already feeling bad about ourselves, good God, we're in trouble, because we're going to say, oh my God, I'm such a loser. And this is problematic because especially, for everybody, we're going to get into the younger people in just a second, but when we look at, I post a lot of travel pictures because I like to travel. I'm not posting those pictures to say, look at me, I get to travel. I travel because that's where my value is. If I take the money that I've earned over the years, there's been no inheritance. There's been no, every penny I have made on my own. So I'm not going to feel guilty about traveling. But other people could look at my travel pictures and go, oh, who does she think she is? Because maybe they're feeling bad because they don't get to do that. Or maybe other people are going, yay, I love that you share your travel pictures with us. That depends on how you're perceiving that in your own brain, right? It's not, some people might be doing social media to make themselves look good so other people think highly of them. Other people are just putting their happiness out there, and that's okay too. The problem comes in how we perceive it. And I'm guilty of this the same way everybody else is. There's a lot of people putting, their bikini shots on, and every other shot is them in a bikini. And I'm judging that. Like, really? Really? Why are you doing this? Are you doing this so people tell you? It's none of my dang business. They might be doing it to go, you know what? I like how I look in my bikini. My perception, I could be either thinking, good for you. You put yourself out there in your bikini, girl. Or I could be thinking to myself, why are you doing that? I'm embarrassed for you. That's my problem, not the person in the bikini. So we have to look at when we're comparing ourselves to what's going on in my brain. Because my judgment of that or them or me is about me. So here's the deal. If you're getting in trouble with yourself with social comparison because it's making yourself feel really horrible, if you find that you're belittling yourself or you're minimizing your own strengths or telling yourself, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy. If that's what this is doing to you, you might want to consider either getting some therapy because how you're thinking about yourself isn't very good to begin with, or stop looking at that stuff. But the truth is, what we do with this information in our head is a reflection of how we're feeling about ourselves. And a lot of it comes down to that, right? So if we're already struggling with our own self-worth, it can be really dangerous to put ourselves in places of social comparison. And yet we doom scroll. Remember that social media stuff? Man, it's tough because some people are putting a realistic version of their life out there, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Other people are putting an idealized version of themselves, but we don't know that. Our perception is where we can get into trouble. We make judgments about what we think other people are doing. And it's really tough because you see these people looking like they don't have a care in the world, and then if we're feeling bad about ourselves, then we really put ourselves down. And these toxic comparisons, and let me repeat this, you're comparing yourself. The toxic comparison is within your own head. It really can erode your emotional lives. And so it can take away your happiness. It can take away your contentment. It can take away your gratitude for what you do have because you're like, I want more. I want that. And it can be so unrealistic. And so if you are comparing yourself and feeling badly about yourself and you're experiencing that frustration, that helplessness, and this inability to think you can get what these people have, why are you putting yourself in that position? We got to get ourselves out of that position because we're adults. Now, kids and teens, it's really dangerous for them, all of this social comparison stuff, especially on social media. And psychologists are telling us, listen, these teens whose brains are still developing and these kids whose brains are still developing, their brains at that age are like supercharged, right? Their brains are developing, they're changing, they're going through this adolescent transition, and all the likes, all the attention is like a dopamine hit. It's a constant dopamine hit, which is why kids get addicted to these, they count their likes and then those poor children who are being brutalized, of course it's leading to depression and suicide attempts because people are telling them and they're feeling like they're awful. So it's especially difficult for kids and adolescents truly becoming addicted. There's an amazing book called The Anxious Generation, and it's about all the research they have done about kids and adolescents on social media and the damage it has done to them. And so now that there's this research, parents are paying more attention, hopefully, and limiting the time, limiting the sites that kids can go onto because it can be extraordinarily damaging or cause an addiction to this dopamine rush. There's another book called Dopamine Nation, which talks about how most of us are now hooked on these dopamine rushes because they are available 24/7 and they come in fast bursts and we get used to that dopamine high. Now, what they're also talking about is that usually, kids, before there was all this social media, would grow up and kind of outgrow this social media thing or this social comparison thing and become kind of your own person, not caring so much what other people think. But one particular psychologist says this hypervigilance about how other people perceive you, it's supposed to go away in adulthood. He said, but social media has created a lifelong adolescence. A lifelong adolescence because we get so hung up on comparing ourselves to other people that we're like kids. It's like, are we still in high school? Yeah, a lot of adults are acting that way. So, but then some research says, hey, it's not all bad news. The tendency to engage in this kind of unhealthy comparison declines across the lifespan. Well, hot damn and hallelujah, but do you have to get into your 60s and 70s and 80s before a person says, I don't care so much what you think about me? And if people grow up with this constant social media bombardment, is that even going to happen? I don't know, but we each have to take responsibility for our own life. And if, as I've gone through this, you've become more aware that social media is really causing you damage in some areas, what are some ways you can cut back? What are some ways you can cut back on comparing yourself and feeling badly about yourself? And let me tell you, it takes discipline. Research says it takes a lot of discipline, just like it takes discipline to become a marathon runner, just like it takes discipline to get through an academic program, just like it takes discipline to climb the ladder at work, just like it takes discipline to learn a foreign language, just like the discipline it takes to lose weight and maintain weight loss. It's about doing and putting forth effort. So, one of the things we need to do if we want to mitigate this negative effect of comparison is really stop and pause and say, okay, this is my initial reaction to this, like I'm judging that person or I'm feeling badly about myself. What is going on in my brain? What are my thoughts? Because remember, go back to the episodes on thoughts and feelings and behavior. Because if we're starting to feel negative about ourselves and we're having these negative thoughts, I don't compare, I never live up, I can't get that done, I feel hopeless, then we're going to feel bad. Because when our thoughts are negative, our emotions are upset. And when our thoughts and our negatives are our thoughts and our emotions are unpleasant and negative, our behavior is negative. And that's why there's an increase in teenagers' suicide attempts, eating disorders, self-destructive behavior, increased alcohol consumption, increased shopping. So negative thoughts lead to negative feelings, lead to negative behaviors. So if you're getting caught up in all this comparison and feeling badly about yourself, and your coping skill happens to be food, you may find yourself eating emotionally and regaining weight. So there's a connection, there's a correlation to all of this. So if social media is bringing you down, you might need to check your thinking, find some logic, and put things in perspective like, okay, it's a social media post. I can't determine the reason for that person posting 25 pictures in their bikini. Yeah, it's making me feel bad because I don't like my lumps and bumps and rolls, and I would never feel confident enough to put myself on a bikini picture online. So I'm being judgmental toward that person, but that is a me problem. That is a me problem. Do I want to have this me problem? No. So put it in perspective. That's what they look like. This is what I look like. And my body serves me in these positive ways. So we have to go through that whole rigmarole of getting our logic to balance our unhealthy, unpleasant emotions. But it's effort, but we need to do that because we got to pull ourselves out of that negative spiral. Now, we got to understand that social comparison is a normal part of being human, but it doesn't mean you should put yourself intentionally in a situation where it's making you feel bad. So if scrolling online is making you feel bad about yourself, quit scrolling online or give yourself a time limit like a healthy parent would do for a child. You have this much time on electronics. That's the end of it. Again, you have to recognize awareness is the first step of change. Here I go again, putting myself down when I'm looking at these things. Is this how I want to treat myself? No, it is not. I think I will go do something that makes me feel better. I'll go garden or I'll go clean out a drawer. All right, so acknowledge when you're comparing, acknowledge when you feel threatened, acknowledge when you feel insignificant, and then acknowledge the good things about you. Or acknowledge, that, okay, that person, has a more accomplished podcast than I do. That's okay. I am doing what I'm doing to help those that I'm supposed to help, right? Pull on that logic, calm yourself down, boost your emotions, and that will boost your thoughts and boost your emotions, and then you'll feel better and you'll behave better. So understand how this compare makes you feel and acknowledge if it's just hurting you. And then ask, if it's hurting you, what's the reason I stay? What is the reason I continue to do this to myself? Because it's really a form of self-punishment at that point. Let's see, remember, you only see the outside of a person. We compare how we feel on the inside to what other people look like on the outside, and we make judgments about what they're showing us. We have no right to make that judgment. We don't like when people judge us. We don't like people to judge us and say, oh, they're overweight, therefore they're lazy, or they're just sit around and eat all day. That's not true. I've worked in this field for 20 years. I know that that is not a true statement. But when you look at somebody and you go, oh, they eat nothing but lettuce, you don't know if that's true. Or, whatever judgment we make about people, we have no right to do it. Just like we don't like people to make judgments, but catch yourself when you're doing that. And then accept your humanity. We're all imperfect. We're all imperfect. And regardless, again, if you weigh 110 pounds or 410 pounds, if you have red hair or if all of your hair has fallen out, if you are 10 feet tall or 2 feet tall, if you have 2 arms and 2 legs or 1 arm and no legs. You have the same value. Every person deserves love, respect, and appreciation, and you deserve it most from yourself. So if you find yourself not giving it to yourself because you're all busy comparing yourself and being lesser than, you might want to knock that off. So limit your social media. Turn your comparison into a motivation. Well, if I want to have the followers Mel has, then I need to do a whole heck of a lot more work. To me, it's not worth it. I'm not going to do that much work. So then I accept what I do have. All right. Shift your focus on who you want to be, how you want to think, how you want to feel, and what you want to accomplish. Focus on you. And give to other people what you desire for yourself. So if you want to not be judged, don't judge other people. If you want compliments, be complimentary. If you want, what goes around comes around. Put the energy out that you want to get back. And then wish people well. Even if it's people like, I hate them, they're what I want to be. Wish them well. Think good thoughts about them, because good thoughts beget good thoughts. Think good thoughts about others. Think good thoughts about yourself. Practice self-compassion. Remember your value. So here's what I want to leave you with as I wind up today's podcast, is that we're all going to compare. We are human. There are times when being human, if we're not in a good place, we're going to judge ourselves harshly and we're going to feel bad. But if that's the norm, then we want to find ways to get away from that. If you're going to compare, work hard to use it as motivation. So your 3 take-homes. Remember, you're comparing your inside to somebody else's outside. Use comparison for motivation to do what it takes to be more of who you want to be. And remember, all of us have equal value. Try to burn those things into your brain, because they are true. They are true statements. We all have equal value. You're comparing yourself to how you feel on the inside and what somebody else is showing you on their outside. And you have to be kind and compassionate and love yourself. All right. This is kind of a heavier topic than I thought it might be, but there you have it. There you have it. Do what you will with this information. I hope you will put it to good use again. And I will post some of the articles that I got some of this information from. And I will also post the names of those books, which are really, really good. If you have children, I would very much encourage you to read Anxious Generation, where it's all based on research about social media and the effects on kids, teens, young adults. And then if you find yourself to be a dopamine junkie, whether it's by shopping or eating or drinking or whatever it is you do to get those quick dopamine bursts, I would read the book Dopamine Nation. All right. Thanks for joining me. I appreciate you. I appreciate your time, and look forward to any comments you have. And I hope this has sound so I don't have to record it again. If it does, I'm just going to skip this week, maybe. No, I don't like to do that. Okay. I will talk with you later. Remember, we're talking about your life. It's your responsibility to make it the way you want. Your life, your health, your responsibility this day and every day. Bye-bye.